A2IM, the collective voice of independent music.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Abelow. I'm the founder and president of Roll Call Records and Management, as well as chief strategy officer at Secret Chord Laboratories, a neuroscience and AI-powered prediction engine. And this is the Embracing AI panel. And today we're going to focus on some emerging artificial intelligence-led technologies that have the potential for major disruption in how we create and how we interact with music and artists. I'm joined by two incredible guests who each have vast experience in different aspects of AI and music, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, starting with Irena.
Hi, I'm Irena Cronin. I'm the CEO of Infinite Retina. It's a company that helps understand what spatial computing is all about, and we do strategy and research.
Yes, my name is Taishi Fukuyama, Chief Operating Officer at Amadeus Code and Evoke Music. We make an AI-assisted songwriting assistant and also a platform where we have monthly free music created by AI.
Awesome. So to start broadly here, what are the major ways in which you see artificial intelligence changing the way artists create and the way we interact with their creation over the next few years?
For one thing, AI will be prevalent in a lot of the tools that we use as creators. For example, you're seeing AI in things like drum loop creation tools, mastering tools. So bits and pieces of it will be prevalent everywhere. I think it's easy to quickly jump to the conclusion and ask questions like, will it be able to write top 40 hits or stuff like that? There probably will be a bit more time until we get there, but before we know it, you'll be using the technology in some of the day-to-day tools that I think you already use.
Cool. Irena, do you want to add anything?
Yes, absolutely. So I do a lot of interviews with companies out in the field, and I also know a lot of VCs. So there are a lot of products out there right now that are working on artificial beings and also AI-assisted, let's say, music scores, and also AI that is used to make music better. So fill in mistakes that were made, etc. For example, there's a company called BetaWorks, which is an accelerator out of New York City run by John Borthwick, who is really into the artificial beings area and has a couple of companies that are working on AI created music and characters. So it is definitely a space that is extremely interesting. Definitely still exploratory. Will take at least 3 to 5 years to really get to where it should be. But in the future, there's a lot that can be done with it. Yeah. So why don't let Taishi talk about some of the things that he's working on, and then I could fill that in.
Yeah, well, I mean, to dive into that with some of the AI songwriting, I mean, artists have been leveraging AI for songwriting for decades in some capacity. Back in the 90s, we had David Bowie, who created Verbicizer as a program to randomly reorder words as possible lyrics. And in the last few years, we've seen Holly Herndon and Tora Mwan, some others working alongside AI to push their music in new directions. Now that AI has advanced considerably from the Verbicizer days, but yet you say it's a few years off from kind of being this next level. Where are we today in how professional artists could potentially use AI as a benefit?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, to even rewind even more, composers like Mozart were even using technology. It might not have been online, but it was just like a pair of dice that when you roll it, it would dictate which part of the score you would go to. So there was like a waltz that Mozart composed, and you can make 46,000 variations of that one piece of music. And that's what technology does at its core. It helps you create faster or more efficiently, right? And to give you a sense of where we are in that timeline of will we be able to make a top 40 hit, I kind of compare it to with the analogy of like a self-driving car. Like I think you may have heard that like there's like that level 5 fully autonomous vehicle. We're probably around 2 or 3 right now when you have LiDAR and cameras like being able to detect people and crosswalks and street signs and stuff like that. Right now, like our technologies, like what we do is we're doing the fundamental songwriting part, writing top line melodies. Some other technologies will help with steering the wheel and pumping the brakes and stuff. So like all that has to come together into one program in a meaningful way that the actual market will adopt and like embrace and say, well, this actually makes sense and I want to use this stuff. So right now I would say we're probably at like level 2, level 3 at most.
So in addition to those moving parts that were just talked about, there's obviously all kinds of different ways of applying machine learning, natural learning processing, and AI in different ways. So it's not only music, it's words. Words are different than music. And putting those two together is definitely more difficult than just having one or the other. So I think a lot of experimentation has been going towards the music part without the words. And then when you put the words in, that's a level of complexity that is what is making this go out a few more years.
So yeah, for words, you have to have an understanding of kind of each cultural understanding of words and slang and what they mean. Is that a big part of the reason why that's a further hurdle?
No, it has mostly to do with phrasing. So it's only recently, over the last year and a half or so, that natural language processing has gone to the point where it's parsing out phrasing. So the way language works, it's not only word per word, it's like in chunks of phrases and words together. So understanding how these things work together, all of the chunks of words, is what's keeping it adding more time to the mix.
Mm-hmm. So putting aside for a second AI that can write songs from front to back, on their own, how do you see artists working hand in hand with artificial intelligence in order to kind of maximize their own creativity rather than feeling like they're giving a big piece of the creative process away to the artificial intelligence?
Why don't you answer that?
Sure thing. So kind of going back to, again, how technology helps you efficiently create cheaper or faster. The benefit of that is obviously those things, but at the same time, you're presented with infinite possibilities of correct answers because, music is not about getting to point A to point B the cheapest or the fastest way. There's a million ways to tell a story, right? A single story, and that's what really music is about. So there are tools that are going to help you quickly come up with songs, but I think ultimately it's up to the creator, the user of that technology, to say, well, this is the one I choose to write lyrics to, or the one that I choose to perform and make their own. And that part is incredibly creative, and it will continue to be a very personal piece of the creation.
Are there any tools that are out there today that you recommend for kind of using that process?
Something like, I would just say stuff like Logic and like the regular stuff that I use, and obviously it's apart from our own. But again, I think technology really shouldn't exist for the fact that we can prove that technology is powerful. It has to exist for a meaningful way for the creator, the user. And in terms of music, being able to iron out mistakes shouldn't, I think, be the purpose of why these types of creative technologies should exist. Like we have to be able to push the boundaries of what's available in our heads and have new ideas that we couldn't have come up with our own. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like the purpose of what the engine that drives what we make.
Absolutely. So there's some people who, voice a fear that, algorithms and AI may lead more to predictable uniformity rather than diversity. And it's possible in some ways we're seeing some of that now, maybe more so on the, playlisting side and rather than necessarily the generation side. what are some ways to make sure we avoid this and do exactly what you're saying? Make sure we're pushing artists to be more adventurous rather than just kind of constantly fitting for the lowest common denominator.
Let me jump in there for a second. So I think this is a misinterpretation of what machine learning and then deep learning can actually do. There are certain different ways that you could use AI. You could use to train to understand what existing music is out there, and then to work and create something off of the existing music. And you could also have it create completely on its own to a great extent. I think the future for this is for the app or whatever technology you're using, the algorithm, to actually be creative and spin itself out of this loop of trained, let's say, repertoire. And that's definitely happening. There are lots of universities that are playing around with this kind of thing. And the music is really interesting. But it's that kind of thing is probably going to take, for it to be sophisticated enough. I'd say for the music itself, it'll take another year. And I think this area is ripe for musicians to be able to play around with chord structure and possible ways of changing their music a little bit, and even more so to see where the melodies can go. That's where the usefulness is.
Interesting. Thanks for setting that straight. So to pivot a little bit off of AI songwriting, in the last year, we've seen some of our first large-scale virtual concerts in the form of both Travis Scott and Marshmello's Fortnite performances. How do you think that spatial computing and location-based entertainment are going to change the music industry, and how should labels and artists be preparing for this?
Irena, I believe this is your space.
Okay. I don't want to take up too much of the time for speaking. It is an absolutely awesome, almost uncharted space. And in terms of business opportunity for artists, I believe that this is the place they should really start to go to. Everything is becoming virtualized and digitized now, even more with COVID. And the opportunity for showing off your music is going in that direction. So people really need to understand what the platforms are and what kinds of digital kind of apps are available, or other kinds of things that can be done to elevate their music. So it's incredibly important for musicians who are already creative to decide to go into this other area, which will help them show off their music.
So what types of platforms are available now? Maybe, there's, that don't require an Epic Games, Fortnite type of collaboration and scale. Is there anything that's really available on a smaller level as of yet?
Excellent question. There are literally, due to COVID especially, there are literally thousands of people working in this space right now to bring about something that is more, that's better than like Zoom, which we're on right now, which is a two-dimensional. We're going to be staying in the two-dimensional space for a while for a number of reasons, so it's not going to just jump into 3D and VR and even AR. It will at some point. I think the platform to really look at, to leverage, to get as many people in as possible, and it's really easy, is Twitch. Mm-hmm. It's much easier. It's certainly better than doing a YouTube live thing. It's more elegant. You can literally get millions of people in there, at a moment's notice if you want to.
And do you see COVID and the kind of non-ability for artists to tour as an accelerant for this?
Yeah. There is no doubt that not being able to fill in studios with real life people, which, it's not to say that, the Rolling Stones made a ton of money on touring, right? Not every band has that opportunity to make that much money, so it's not always a complete moneymaker, but it certainly is great for marketing for an artist. You take that away, what do you have? It's you have to think in very creative ways to be able to bring the audience to you. And right now, that opportunity is completely available, virtualized and digital. Just needs to be thought through how to use that.
Mm-hmm.
That's very powerful.
So you mentioned kind of where we're at now, and eventually it'll be, fully 3D. And then you also mentioned the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
What are some of the potential uses that you see kind of like when we reach peak ability for this location-based entertainment? Are we going to have the ability to perhaps go back in time to see a classic Rolling Stones concert? What are some of the other things you're envisioning?
Well, there's lots of iterations. So before we jump to the epitome of what it could do, it's got to move through the live 5G 360, which lots of companies are working on. And that's going to happen. So where conferences, I'm always thinking about conferences as well, virtual conferences, where you have music events happening, which they will in the future. So you give another year or so, this thing will start to come up again. But the virtualization of those live conferences is extremely interesting as well. So 5G comes in, you have a stadium, you can stream it live, you can charge for that, and it's in 360, and then it'll move beyond 360. So that's kind of like the start of where you get the event space really understanding digital beyond just this, 2D effect on Twitch. Yes, for the future, there's been a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, there's been some pushback to volumetric kinds of creation of artists who have already died, like the Whitney Houston effect, basically. I think that'll break through in the future. Right now, it's seen as the uncanny valley. People tend to be a little irked by it. Mm-hmm. Given that digitization is happening, and it's going to happen even more as years go by, I do see the epitome of this happening in terms of turning maybe deceased musicians, having like full-scale events around them. And you mentioned the Rolling Stones. It is possible even now, although it's not very sophisticated, to take a 2D video and make it 3D. Mm-hmm. It's just not beautiful yet. So maybe in the future, we could take like a Beatles, event that has been thoroughly videotaped and create 3D out of that, colorize it. And yeah, sure, that opportunity is definitely there.
Interesting. But you wouldn't be able to be quite as immersive in a situation like that because it's coming off of a 2D into 3D, or how would that work exactly?
No, there are algorithms that can effectively turn it into a 3D space so that you can actually move throughout it.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, with both the things we're talking about, maybe more so on the AI songwriting side, should artists and music companies have any concerns that this is going to encroach on, the original artist music space? And what do you think about that?
I would say, there's a lot of discussion regarding that blurry line, right? And maybe that song title actually kind of is a bit pun intended now that I say it. But the creation based on data sets of other people's work, right now, when we do it as humans, we treat it as creativity. We listen, we experience, we learn, we remember, we reorganize that information to create our own music. Essentially, that's what computers and algorithms do. We just don't have the proper infrastructure in terms of laws to make that clear-cut and digestible for everybody. At the end of the day, I believe probably that commercially, whoever will have the most benefit will unfortunately write the rules for this, whether it be the technology platforms. Hopefully the creators will have a big say in this, and the consumers too, but they will ultimately decide.
I think it's a big thing. Hopefully the creators have a say. So we only have about a minute left, so I want to have one last question for both of you. what new jobs or skill sets do you envision proving invaluable over the next few years for both musicians and music companies? What's the new job title we're going to start seeing as a hire at labels that we didn't see before?
I'll take one of those. So ultimately, whether you're performing online, streaming as a virtual being, I think essentially it'll still come down to storytelling and building narrative and building stories. So I think that part will continue to be very powerful, and the more skills you have there, the more in demand you will be. These virtual beings will not spin up their own narratives, and it'll always be the humans that make that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you will see a great increase in needs for people who understand digitization and virtualization, and people who understand music, since they're working with musicians, and how to leverage the digital kinds of things that could be done with them.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks both of you for the insightful conversation. That about wraps up our time. So now we're going to bring it in for a Q&A.